Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Dr. Worthey-Thomas, and I am the Deputy Administrator for Housing over at the Housing Division, State of Nevada Housing Division. And I'm also a member of the Nevada Housing Coalition Board. So I just want to thank you all for joining us today and joining us for this wonderful conference, and thank you for coming into this particular session. I'd also like to welcome those online. We have several people who are joining us virtually, so thank you as well. And of course, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll have at the end, we'll give you all in the audience a chance to ask some questions. So today we're going to be talking about all things public housing authority. I think that for the most part, everybody knows that the housing authority does vouchers, but what we want to focus on vouchers as well, because that's an important part of what they do. But we also want to talk about some of the more nuanced things that our housing authorities do. So first, we're going to get started with some questions, well, with some introductions first. We have Bill Brewer, the Executive Director for the Nevada Rural Housing Authority, and also the president of our Nevada Housing Coalition. And then we have John Gresley, the interim executive director for the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority. And then joining us virtually is Amy Jones, the executive director of the Reno Housing Authority. So thank you all for joining us today and giving us a peek inside of your organization and the things that you do. So first, I'm going to allow you an opportunity to just give us a little bit of an overview of your housing authority and what some of the unique things are that you all do. So we'll start with you, Bill.
Thank you, May. I'm Bill Brewer with Nevada Rural Housing Authority. So how about this? Is that better? About the same. So in the room, I'm told this microphone is not for the people in the room. You're going to have to listen to me holler. This is for the people online. So it looks like I'm trying to talk louder to you, but I'm talking to the people online. Sorry about that. Bill Brewer, Nevada Rural Housing Authority. Nevada Rural Housing Authority was created by the state legislature in 1973. Mr. Gresley and Amy will tell you about their housing authorities in the major populated areas of the state. Nevada Rural Housing Authority was created to cover everything else. And so we cover about 110,000 square miles of mostly nothing, and about 17% of the state's population spread over that vast area. And so that's the real challenge we have. We administer the Housing Choice Voucher Program for that area. We have about a grand total of 1,500 vouchers that we utilize over that area. Not anywhere close to enough. I think my two colleagues would agree that they don't have anywhere near enough either. We'll talk about how that looks in reality in a minute. But anyway, that's what we do. We try to cover the ladder, as Mr. Diaz showed us earlier. We cover the spectrum from homeless to home buyer in terms of our programs. We own and manage multifamily properties in rural Nevada to help people obtain housing. And we also have a down payment assistance program to help people buy houses. And so we try to cover that spectrum, which is a little unique for us and something that I think my colleagues don't do, but they do things that we don't. So you'll be glad to hear from them as well.
I'm ready for you.
Okay, forget this isn't working here. It works for everybody. I'm John Gresley. I'm the interim director of the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority. And last Thursday was my 7-month anniversary, and I expect I'll probably be gone in about 2 months. So let me just get that out of the way. The agency's in the process of recruiting a new executive director. We began that process back in about April, and hopefully that's going to be wrapped up in the next few weeks. A little bit about our agency. There are just 3 non-Native American housing authorities in Nevada. And by the way, I have a suggestion for you, Bill. I used to work with a housing authority, not quite as large a territory as yours, and they had their own airplane. So I think you need to get your own airplane. But I've been in the business a little over 50 years, starting at HUD and working at the Oakland Housing Authority for 2 years, retired from there about 11 years ago, and then worked briefly under the Obama administration as the regional administrator of HUD. So I came to Las Vegas back in March, at the end of March, and have been there since. The focus has been on really working with the board around their roles, their role of governance, and also focusing on the operations of the housing authority and trying to chart out some strategic opportunities that we have there. Let me tell you a little bit about the housing authority. It originally was 3 separate housing authorities. There was a Clark County Housing Authority with its headquarters on Flamingo, way out east. The Las Vegas Housing Authority, City of Las Vegas Housing Authority, and the City of North Las Vegas Housing Authority, three separate housing authorities. They were brought together I think about 12 years ago. Frank works with us. Frank Safford is our modernization development. He'll give me some clues here if I give you wrong information. But they were united into one housing authority about roughly 12 years ago. And we have a board that's made up of presently of 2 county commissioners from the county and 3 city council members from each of the large cities, and then 4 residents, 1 from each of those jurisdictions. And that's the board. And I'm particularly pleased. In my experience, one of the strongest boards I've ever worked with, even though not a lot of experience, because they're all fairly new, relatively new, but they are really dedicated people and really committed to the performance of the agency. So we operate principally 3 programs. Of course, you all know about housing choice vouchers. We have about 12,000, almost 12,600 housing choice vouchers, including a recent increment of 586 emergency vouchers, which we're in the process of putting out on the street right now. Unfortunately, that program is full, not the emergency vouchers, but the rest of the vouchers are for the most part fully subscribed. We are in fact trying to bring our leasing down to get within our leasing bounds by HUD. So we do not expect to be issuing any new vouchers, at least this calendar year, maybe next spring. The one exception besides emergency vouchers is VASH, Veterans Vouchers. Those vouchers are processed through the Veterans Administration, and we don't do the outreach and we don't do the initial selection. We process those through the VA, and we have room for veterans, and we'd be happy to have more veterans in that program. Our next largest program, which is about 2,149 units, is our public housing. Now that's a program that's evolving through time, and we'll talk more about that later in the afternoon. We have currently 6 properties for seniors with about 708 units. We have 13 properties for families with 1,055 units, and that includes 3 relatively newer or rehabbed properties that are mixed finance properties. And then we have 386 single family houses that are part of the public housing program. They're scattered all over this whole urban area. Then our third program, which is really kind of a legacy program that goes back to the original housing authorities that were here. Clark County Housing Authority was very entrepreneurial, as was the Las Vegas Housing Authorities, and did some pretty untraditional things. I've worked with a lot of housing authorities, and I've seen very few do what been done here, was done early in the life of the program. The housing authorities all developed a number of properties that have no federal subsidy at all. They don't have any federal assistance. They're not Section 8, they're not public housing. They're part of what we call the affordable housing portfolio. And they include 1 senior property with 249 units, 3 family properties with 352 units, and then 2 mobile home parks where we own the land and the residents have, for the most part, have their own mobile homes on those. We have a variety of other small sites with single family houses, about 213 units. So that program is a total of 1,933. That also includes 5 senior properties that have been converted through the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And 3 family properties that have been converted through the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. So that's our portfolio. Within that, we do have a very small contingent of Section 8 home ownership. And that kind of gives you a summary of what we have on on deck.
Awesome.
Am I up?
Would you like to share with us about Reno Housing Authority?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
I think you may.
Can you guys hear me? Is that better? Okay. I'm Amy Jones. I'm the executive director with the Reno Housing Authority. And our jurisdiction is Washoe County. So all of the city of Reno, city of Sparks, and then the unincorporated Washoe County. We are able to assist over 4,000 households throughout Washoe County. And we do that through a number of programs. We do have the Housing Choice Voucher Program. We have specialty vouchers similar to what John spoke about. So the HUD-VASH vouchers, emergency rental assistance vouchers. We do have foster youth to independence vouchers. And then we have our public housing sites, so have 751 public housing units. And then we have, similar to what John spoke about, we call them our below market units. So those are properties that we purchased, no subsidy tied to them, and we're able to rent those out to the community to under market. And then lastly, we do have 165 scattered sites. And so those are single family homes, duplexes, condos, and we were able to acquire those through the neighborhood stabilization program. So we're able to help quite a few families throughout Washoe County. One other unique thing about the Reno Housing Authority is we're a moving to work agency. And so what that does, there's only 39 moving to work agencies throughout the United States under the original program. And that allows us flexibility with the regulations and allows us to create activities that support our local community and local needs. So one of the most exciting activities that we created right in the beginning was a mobility program. And what we did is we took public housing residents that were in good standing. We offered them the opportunity to move into one of our scattered sites, single family homes that were in low poverty areas. And they were able to move to that unit, and they were still assisted through a voucher. And we worked with those families in becoming more self-sufficient, meeting goals that they may have. And we were looking at, we administer the program and we look at what those outcomes are. It's a small sample, so we don't have exactly what those outcomes are, but we really want to see what those benefits are for the children. And also the adults. We've had, since the inception of the program, we've had 6 households that are still in the units, but no longer receiving any type of assistance. So we feel those are very positive outcomes. So those are things that we're able to do with our moving to work designation. And, we continue to look at our community and see how we can help more. There's a huge homeless concern here in Reno. So we're looking at how can we help our community in addressing those needs. So that's kind of a very brief summary of what we do here in Reno.
And so can you tell us some of the requirements of your moving to work program?
So with the moving to work program, as I mentioned, we have different activities. And so we have different programs that we have for our residents. So some of the programs that we have outside of our mobility program, we have a workforce development department that we're really, really starting to focus on our families. And to be eligible for that program, you do have to be a resident of our public housing or participant on our Housing Choice Voucher Program. And we're really excited this year. We started working with our youth in those households because we really want to start with them and let them know what opportunities are out there beyond high school. And that could be trades, that could be college, that could be going into the military. And so we're really, really starting that focus. So other things we look at are, again, what helps our community. And so we have seen, again, as I mentioned, the concern with homeless increasing. So we have set aside specific vouchers for homeless seniors and homeless individuals coming out of the shelter, working with case managers. So I don't know if I'm really answering the question of requirements. It's more so, what are we doing to look at what the community needs are and how can we better support our community? I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. So tell me, how are your housing authorities governed? I know some of you have boards. So how is that relationship as far as the management of your day to day?
Well, I'll jump in on that. Our governing authority is prescribed somewhat by HUD and somewhat by state statute. And so we're unique from my colleagues here at Nevada Rural Housing Authority in that the state statute prescribes that the Nevada Association of Counties appoints 2 of our board members. The Nevada League of Cities appoints 2 of our board members. And then we have 1 program participant, meaning someone who's receiving assistance from us, who is jointly appointed by League and NACO. And so that makes up our 5-member board. We have the best board anywhere. I'm happy to brag about that in front of these guys because they understand their role is policy and not the day-to-day operation. So they're not hanging around the building telling us what to do. They govern as they should, and that allows us to be able to operate the authority then as it should be.
Well, we have some similarities in that our board is prescribed by state law. That's unusual, actually, in Nevada. I think in Nevada it's unusual in that regard because 2 of the 3 housing authorities, the boards are prescribed by the state. Our law that governs the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority says that Clark County will appoint 2 commissioners, one of whom must be an elected member of that body of their county commission. They in fact have appointed 2 from that commission. So we have 2, but we only by law are required to have 1. So we have 2 county commissioners. Then the law also prescribes that the city council of each of the 3 largest cities in the county will appoint 1 commissioner from their body. So that's how we have the 3 city council members from Henderson, North Las Vegas, and Las Vegas. Then additionally, each of those boards appoints 1 resident commissioner. So when it's time, as we just went through this in the last few months actually, but it pointed last week, we will put out a notice to all of our residents who are living within a particular jurisdiction that has an opening coming up. And then the residents express an interest. All their applications are reviewed. They're actually considered by something called a resident advisory board, which is made up of our already existing resident commissioners and the presidents of the various resident councils. They screen them down to the top 5. They rank them, and then they send that on. In this case, it was to the county. And then the county made a selection about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago of a new commissioner. So that's our commissioners. I don't know, Bill, we might want to have a softball game between the 2 commissions, who's the better one. You know, it's one of the things I focused a lot on, particularly since I retired 11 years ago, is governance and working with boards. I've done a lot of training nationally for commissioners. So I've taken that experience and brought it to this board, and it's been spending a lot of time with them. And I think they have a really appropriate appreciation for their role as policymakers, but they also see themselves as holding the staff and the organization accountable for performance. So while they're not into the weeds on the day-to-day, their ears are open and they're paying attention. And they do bring to our attention matters of concern and make sure that the community feels that they're paying attention to what's going on. So they're, without interfering in what we do, they do pay attention to what we're doing and how we're performing.
And the Reno Housing Authority Board is also governed by NR. No? Is that better? Okay. Is that better? So Reno Housing Authority Board is also governed by NRS. We have a 5-member board. We do have 1 resident member who is a senior from our senior complex. Our members are appointed by the Reno City Council. So we do have at least 1 Reno City Council member on our board. Currently, we have one council member and the mayor sits on our board. And then the 2 additional members are from the community. We have one that's from NV Energy and oh my gosh, I just forgot. Actually, one from NV Energy and one that's a retired city council member.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So let's take it back to basics. Everybody knows about Section 8, which is now housing choice vouchers. Tell us, pretend like we have never heard of Section 8 or a voucher, and tell us some of the basics around how that program works. Whoever wants to take that.
Thanks so much, John. Most people, as May said, I think are somewhat familiar with the housing choice voucher. You basically pay 30, this is very general, not specific, because we're talking in very generalities here, but you basically pay 30% of your income for rent. The voucher makes up the difference. So as an example, if your income is $1,000 a month and your rent is $800 a month, then you would pay $300 towards the rent. The housing choice voucher would make up the other $500. Does that make sense? Kind of. So that's generally, very generally how that works. The vouchers have to first, priority goes to extremely low income households. And I hope you're familiar with these categories or these definitions. Extremely low household is at 30% of the area median income or less. Then we have very low income households, which are at 50% or below. So most of our vouchers have to go to that extremely low income category. And so that's who we serve first, and the folks that we pull off of the waiting list to receive new vouchers. We verify income and all of those kinds of things, assuming they're able to get off of the waiting list. They go through this verification process. Then they're issued a voucher, and we say, go forth and rent. Well, that sounds pretty simple, but that's the problem we run into, at least in our area in Northern Nevada. The rents are so, I won't say ridiculously high, but they're really high, let's say. And so the HUD rents that are prescribed to be used with the vouchers are about 2 years behind. HUD gets data from a full year, then it goes back and they turn the crank on that and decide what the rents should be about a year later. And so by the time we get our rents as prescribed from HUD, they're about 2 years old. Well, the market is rapidly changing, as you're all well aware. And so our rents are way behind by the time they roll out. And we just don't have the ability to meet the market. And so our poor voucher recipients are out there shopping for a unit, and there just aren't enough units that meet their affordability criteria. And so that's the big challenge we have in Northern Nevada. I'm sure Amy sees the same problem in her jurisdiction. I don't think, John, quite as much. You guys have a lot more housing down here than we do in Northern Nevada, and that's not, it's just a problem for us. I'll say that. And so that's basically the housing choice voucher. Hope I explained that sort of appropriately. Straighten me out, John.
Well, you know, we're fully subscribed, so we don't have people coming in getting new vouchers, going out looking on the market. But what we do have is people living in Section 8 units that are coming up on an anniversary, and the landlords are raising the rents in huge, huge increases. And so we're seeing a lot of residents being displaced because the rents that they're being asked to pay are over our limits now. Because like Bill, we're getting our new income fair market rents calculated from HUD. We just received them. We'll have new fair market rents going into effect. They're going up at the smaller size units, they're going up about 6-7%. At the higher size units, they're only going up about 3 or 4% at the larger units. but they're not keeping up with the market. And you know, we're probably going to have to be challenging it after the first of the year when we get into our new rents, and see if they work at these new levels that we have, and see how much difficulty. But we don't have people having difficulty getting into the program because the program's fully subscribed. What we have problems is people in the program that can't stay in the units they're in because the rents are going up so rapidly.
So
And
how do you
I-
handle that? Does that mean they would have to pay more of the rent, or will you meet them with paying some of that as well?
In most cases, the rules require that they pay the difference
Really?
because we're calculating our payment standard and that's what we offer. And if the rents go up much above that, if they want to stay where they are, they're going to have to come up with a difference.
And I will just throw in on that, that's the difference between a new voucher recipient and a current recipient. So in John's case, where the landlord is raising the rent for a current tenant, they have the choice of paying that difference. That they're getting so much on their voucher, but they're not going to get any more. And so if they want to stay there, that comes out of their pocket. For a new tenant, they don't even have that option. Their rent cannot be more than the fair market rent prescribed by HUD. So it's a real issue on both ends, for sure. It forces that tenant to make a very difficult decision.
And
Yes, ma'am.
And typically what we do, I mean, and it didn't always used to be this way. When the markets were a little calmer, housing authorities would often have the luxury of looking at the fair market rents that HUD would publish, and we would maybe go up approaching the fair market rents, but to try to not inundate the market with a lot of public funds, we would maybe put our payment standards at 90% or 95%. We don't have that option anymore. We're going out on February 1st with 110% of the fair market rents because that's what we can do without getting additional HUD authority. So we're chasing that number, and we can get above it. We can get above their numbers, but only 10%. And we'll test that out for a while and see how it goes. And we may have to go back to HUD and seek authority to go another 10%.
so here in in Reno area,
The question from the audience was around what fair market rents refers to. And so you gave somewhat of a kind of a definition of what that is referring to.
So she's gonna wave when she has something to say.
Oh, okay.
She's been trying to chime in for like.
Oh,
Go,
okay.
Amy.
okay. So I did want to just say that in Reno, we have the same exact problem. We did have to go up to 120% for our fair market, our payment standards. And at one point, we even had to go higher with the waiver from HUD because we were having such a hard time with our household trying to find units. And as we talk about the rent increases, you know, once that person is in a unit, at that point, if the landlord increases the rent, the individual can pay the difference because we don't look at that affordability any longer. We just look at that initial move-in. So when those landlords increase the rent, then that individual has to look and determine, can I afford that increase? Or if not, do I have to move? And then we run into even bigger problem if they decide to move, because now they have their voucher and their voucher is not going to be affordable for most of these units because they've already increased the units. And I've heard stories from seniors that have had to decide, do I buy food? Do I buy medication? Or do I pay my rent because they don't want to be put out on the street? And then just one other thing I wanted to comment on is, when vouchers are issued off of a wait list, housing authorities have different methods as to how they do that. And maybe Bill and John can speak to theirs. But with the Reno Housing Authority, we have preferences. And what that means is when somebody applies, they claim preferences. And our biggest preference is to be a Washoe County resident because we want to make sure we're helping the individuals in our community first. And then the next biggest preference is elderly, disabled, or families. And then from there, they're smaller as far as substandard housing, homeless. I don't have them all, but we work that way. So when you come to the top of the list, you come because of your preferences. And I guess just one other thing to comment on in our area, because we do have those preferences when our wait lists are open. Individuals are constantly moving on our wait list because somebody might apply with a higher preference. And people always question and get upset, why do we close our wait list? And we do that either because it's getting large or because we want to work with those people that are on the wait list so they're not moving around and we can work through them, get them to the top of the list and get housed. So those are just a few things that I get questioned and asked about. And I know John and Bill both do their wait list different.
How many people do you have on your wait list?
We have about 4,000 between our public housing and housing choice voucher.
And John and Bill?
We have about 5,000 on our Section 8 wait list right now, and it's closed. We opened it back in, I think, March, and we had somewhere north of 20,000 people that came in to apply, and we ran them through a lottery and got it down to about 5,000. I'm not sure how many we have in the public housing, but it's in the thousands as well.
So when you did the lottery, how did that cull that down to from 20,000 to 5,000? What was some of the criteria?
There was no, it's just simple. It's just a number. It's just a number because most of the people are going to qualify for some priority or another. And so it's just a simple number. Names are drawn and we get the 5,000. And I think you have a question in the back of the room.
Oh, yes.
During the pandemic, have you seen a measurable increase in households with housing choice vouchers transferring among the 3 housing authority jurisdictions, or people moving from out of state who might have a housing choice voucher? Like how does that transferability in geography work as it relates to your administration of housing?
Just to repeat that or to synthesize, during the pandemic, have you seen people transferring their vouchers from different jurisdictions and also coming in from out of state?
And I'll just mention from our aspect, we don't see that a lot in rural Nevada. We do see some porting. Some folks in rural Nevada want to move to the Las Vegas area or to the Reno area. We call that porting. They can take their voucher and move to another area. But we don't see a lot of that in rural Nevada. On the other hand, I know that Las Vegas has seen a tremendous influx of folks.
Yeah, and I should qualify this by saying I've only been here since March. So I've only been here since, a year into the pandemic. I don't know what it was like 2 years ago, but I do know that in the last 2 years, there's been a huge influx of people. We literally have, I got a list the other day of all of the different locations people are coming from. They're coming from all over the country, from as far away as the East Coast, all up and down the East Coast, but predominantly from, you might not be surprised, Southern California is where most are coming from. In fact, I want to talk about that a little bit more, and I'll get into it later in our afternoon to talk to you a little bit about the impact of that. But we literally have thousands of people who have ported in with Section 8 vouchers from other areas. We're not getting so much from Bill. I wish we were. I'd like to give him back because we're overleased. He's underleased. And I don't think we have very many from Amy either, but a lot of other places.
And as far as the Reno Housing Authority, I don't believe we've seen an increase in portability during COVID. It pretty much stayed status quo.
Okay. Yes.
I was glad to hear John mention that you had plenty of HUD-VASH vouchers and that you got room for more veterans. I was just wondering if Reno had the same situation or a little different.
The question from the audience is whether Reno has an abundance of VASH vouchers.
HUD-VASH.
HUD VASH.
Yes, we do. We recently were awarded 98 additional HUD-VASH vouchers earlier this year. So we have about, yes, we do have HUD-VASH. We were awarded 98 additional HUD-VASH vouchers earlier this year. And right now we have about 250 HUD-VASH vouchers that are not leased. And the reason for that is we're working with our VA, and they are trying to stay up with getting more case managers on board. Something that we've been looking at is project basing those HUD-VASH vouchers. And what that means is we would be able to assign a specific voucher to a specific unit, whether that's a unit we own or with a private landlord. And so that assistance is tied to that specific unit, which is beneficial to the HUD-VASH program because they now have units that they can take their veterans to and lease. So that's something we're working on right now. We did an RFP a couple months ago, and we did have one property apply, and they want 66 vouchers. So that's a huge benefit for the program and the VA. We are looking at developing a small 12 unit apartment, and we will be applying 12 HUD-VASH vouchers to that property as well. So it's a huge benefit for the VA to have their clients in one location and know that those units are out there specifically for their veterans.
Yes.
Can we ask a couple of virtual questions?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm gonna combine a couple of these because they're kind of in the same vein. So can one of you describe, did I hear correctly that issued vouchers do not ever increase their amount? So if the landlord raises rent after a year and the landlord raises the rent that's still within the new FMR value, fair market rent value, will the voucher cover it? And part two, is it possible to have state or federal funds fill in that gap between FMR and market rates, such as adding a tiny bit to real estate transfer tax or something like that? So how do we fill the gap, and what does that look like? Katie.
Did they hear that online, Katie, or do we need to repeat that?
You need to repeat the question as well. Sorry. It's a big one.
Is
So-
it in the chat? Are they reading it from the chat?
Yep, so if the landlord raises rent year after year, but it's still within the new FMR value, will the voucher cover it? And then the next piece to this, is it possible that local or state government can create a source of funds to fill the gap between FMR and market rents?
You started on that, Amy. Do you want to go with it?
Sure. So if landlord increases the rent, but it still falls within that payment standard, then most likely, yes, the voucher will continue to cover that and there will be no increase to the client. So I've seen it much lately because the landlords are increasing their rents so much. But years ago, yes, it would typically be covered. And then the question about, can local governments fill the gap? Yes, they can. Local government can create their own programs to be able to support the housing authority. Years ago, a housing trust fund was created by Washoe County here, and it was to be funded by the government service tax. That has yet to happen. Everybody wants a piece of that money. So it has yet to be dispersed between all of the different entities that want it. But the idea was for that gap, to fill that gap. So that's absolutely an option. I think the challenge to that, and then I'll let the other two, Bill and John, is that it has to be sustainable. And that's, there has to be a current revenue, ongoing revenue to that, whatever that, into the, like for us, the housing trust fund. So it's ongoing. We don't want to get to a point where we're helping someone and then we say, sorry, we can't help you anymore. We've ran out of money.
Okay. Are we losing vouchers to people out of state? So if someone comes in from out of state and they have the portable voucher, does that mean somebody locally is getting bumped?
That's a great question, and I'll start off with that because we don't see that much in rural Nevada, but it doesn't bump people necessarily. If we're fully subscribed, we don't have to receive that voucher. The authority where they receive the voucher initially can continue to support that voucher. And so we just have another voucher holder in the area is essentially how that would work. So we're not receiving fewer vouchers. The real challenge we have is just not enough vouchers. And I'll take this opportunity to kind of frame that for us a little bit. Just to give you an idea of relativity, the numbers of vouchers assigned to the various states really hasn't changed at all for, I don't know, John, 40 years, 30 years. So just as an example, Nevada has about 3 million people. City of Chicago has about 3 million people. Nevada has, as you heard us earlier this morning, we have about 18,000 vouchers to go around in Nevada. Chicago has about 60,000. Now, I don't begrudge Chicago their vouchers, they need them all. But what's happened is we've had a tremendous influx over the last 25 years in Nevada with no adjustment to the vouchers that we have. And so we are very underserved in Nevada. And that's where I would ask for your advocacy as you talk to particularly your federal elected officials, and we see these funds begin to roll out from Washington. That's part of what we really need, is to create those vouchers so that we can at least do some rebalancing based on the population shifts. You want to fix what I said, John?
Well, our numbers are a little bit different, but very similar. So let me give you the numbers I looked up in preparing for today, because I knew this was going to come up, and I think it needs to be brought up because it's really a political issue that we can't solve. I was asked at a meeting probably in about July by one of my commissioners why Chicago, with the same population as Clark County, more or less, has 54,000 units of vouchers, whereas we have 12,000. And I since I started my career in Chicago in 1971, I kind of knew the answer. But let me just give you some figures. Population of Chicago in 1950 was 3,620,000 and some change. Population today in Chicago, or 2020, they've dropped about 1 million. So they're down to about 2,693,000. So they're slightly larger than Clark County. Clark County is today, well, 2020, 2,376,000. But in 1950, Clark County was 48,000. So none of you were here then, right? It was a tiny little place. Didn't have much population. Well, where did all those vouchers come from in Chicago that didn't come here? Well, the reason is that Chicago tore down thousands of units, tens of thousands of units of public housing, you know, in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, because at one time Chicago had tens of thousands of public housing units on the south side. Cabrini Green, many of you have heard of Cabrini Green State Housing, Robert Taylor Homes, all those big properties that were there when I worked there back in the 70s, they're all gone. And they issued vouchers to all those families, and those vouchers have remained there. There's been a huge population shift in this country. Not just here. This is not the only place, but there's never been any kind of political adjustment to that. There's never been a righting of the distribution. And so it's perhaps a political opportunity that is new resource. I mean, there haven't really been any new vouchers coming out for many years. The federal government has not been funded at a level that we've continued to expand the supply of Section 8 vouchers. I don't know when's the last time the budget increased at a level where housing authorities got new allocations, other than these special programs that Amy and Bill and I've talked about, like emergency housing vouchers and VASH vouchers and so forth. There hasn't been any big increase. But so what we've done is we've perpetuated the supply in communities that have been losing population, but we haven't added to the supply proportionate to the growth in the populations in some of these other areas that have received huge housing shifts. So that's something that none of us can deal with at a housing authority, but it's really a political issue that is going to have to be advocated, I believe. I do want to go back and answer the underlying question that began this discussion, though, is does having units coming into your jurisdiction bump people? Well, what it does, it can put people in front. So Bill's right. In his case, because he has not a lot of influx, it's not really having a big impact on him. But for a housing authority that has a lot of units coming in, it becomes expensive to handle them without absorbing them. So there's a political incentive for the housing authority to absorb, because if they absorb, they get 100% of the admin fee. If they don't absorb, then they bill the home housing authority. So if someone moves here from Chicago, we have to bill the Chicago Housing Authority and we get a piece of the fee. We don't get the full fee. So we have to do the same amount of work, add the billing, and we don't get as much money. So there's an incentive for housing authorities to absorb. That's what we've been doing. And as a result of our doing that, I say our doing that, the housing authority doing that for the last roughly 9 months or so, there's been no one taken off a wait list, moved into Section 8. We've only been absorbing. So we're re-examining that, as you might imagine, because we want to serve the families that are here. And so I anticipate that after January 1st, we'll be issuing vouchers. We have stopped absorbing. We stopped absorbing in about July. And I would anticipate that we'll start going back to our wait list after the first of the year. There's a question back there.
Oh, yes.
So on that note, going beyond the capital factors, obviously, figure to not be somewhere for the voucher recipients to actually live, because it's really hard to find someplace that would take the vouchers, especially with the increase of rent. So to that end, I believe you mentioned at the top that there are about like 1,900 units that are owned by SNHC that are unsubsidized housing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Some of them are Section 8, but a small conclusion.
Some of those,
More of them aren't, or those aren't.
no, in fact, that is I think that's a strategic opportunity for the housing authority to look at, because these are programs or properties that, for the most part, now I included in that 8 properties that are RAD, so they are project-based. Those are project-based.
Can you repeat what you're actually referring to?
Okay, so we have about 1,933 apartments or homes that we consider part of our affordable housing program, that the properties themselves have no federal restrictions and they have no direct federal subsidy. But there are 8, in fact, I included in that 8 properties that actually do, because they're project-based, they're RAD, Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. In addition to that, and I think the ones you're asking about are, we have 2 family properties, actually 3 family properties and 1 senior property, with a total of about 600 units that are unsubsidized. They do have some Section 8 in them. So those would be ones where a tenant could bring, a Section 8 voucher holder could bring that voucher. And I believe we do have some vouchers in those properties. But they're not. No, and I think we got to think about this, the talk we heard this morning. These are not at the market. These are not as attractive, perhaps, to many people to bring a voucher to them because they are already below market rentals, in effect. It does bring up another matter. I'm just curious to know how many of you in the room, and I can't see the people that are here virtually, how many of you in the room are with organizations that sponsor nonprofit or for-profit affordable housing? A few of you are, okay. One of the opportunities that exists, I mean, think about this. You're in this hot market. You've got a voucher. You go somewhere and you get in a unit, and then a year later, the landlord raises the rent a huge amount. I think one of the best opportunities for partnership is between housing developers and project-based vouchers from housing authorities, particularly with landlords that are motivated by the mission of providing affordable housing. That's the nonprofits, that's even for-profits that are motivated by that mission. You put a voucher, you put a person with a voucher, not so much a voucher, but a project-based voucher into one of those properties, chances are those owners are not going to raise the rent disproportionately the next year. They're motivated by the mission of providing affordable housing. So one of the really great benefits that can come from partnering between housing authorities and the outside world of owners and developers of property is project basing of Section 8, because it creates an area of the market that's not subject to such high increases in rent. So just something to think about.
So what happens when rents are increased? Do you all help people find units to use their vouchers, or are they required to go find that themselves? And then when you have a situation with a really big rent increase, are you losing people to homelessness, or are they just biting the bullet and paying what has to be paid?
That's a great question, May. I'll address the first part of that. We don't typically help people find rental units because we don't have the manpower for that. We certainly provide them a list of opportunities. The state maintains a list of affordable housing properties all over the state, and we refer them to that list, but they have to do their own searching, typically. As far as, what was the second part of your question? Are we losing people?
Yeah.
And we are occasionally losing some because the rents become more than they can afford. When, as was mentioned earlier, when you're making a choice between buying food or medicine or transportation and making your rent payment, you may choose to live in your car so you can eat. Those are just some of the terrible choices that people sometimes have to make.
So with the, a voucher is such a precious commodity because of the long wait list. People are you seeing this, John and Amy? Are you seeing people allowing their voucher to lapse when it probably took them some years to actually get a hold to one?
Well, go ahead, Amy.
I would say yes, we have seen that happen because they are having trouble finding a unit. We are issuing our vouchers for 120 days so they can look for a unit, and we regularly extend it up to 180 days so to help them find a unit. I think for our clients, a lot of them are making that hard decision and staying in their units and just figuring out how they can pay that rent versus becoming homeless. And it's a terrible situation to put anyone in. And, I hear it from seniors so much. And I know we have great advocates here in Washoe County that are working for those seniors to help this situation. But I think for Washoe County, they're making that hard decision and staying housed.
Yeah, let me just add, part of the answer is that some receive help and some don't. And by that, I mean the recipients of the emergency housing vouchers are receiving assistance from the continuum of care providers in the county. So many of them are receiving assistance, referrals, helping them do searches and so forth. But we're experiencing the same thing that Bill's describing generally. We don't have the resources. What we do try to do is promote the program to landlords so that we attract more landlords into the program. And that's tough right now in this market because landlords are seeing they can get a lot more money now than they were getting before. So it's a hard sell, but that's a part of our effort is to promote the program and to try to retain landlords and to try to develop new landlords.
And I would just like to echo what John is saying.
The question is, how long does it take for a landlord to get approved to accept housing choice vouchers, and what's that process? What does that process look like?
Well, I'll just kick it off. Amy will straighten me out. But it would go very fast. And I'm assuming this from a standpoint of somebody showing up on your doorstep as a landlord saying, I have a voucher and I want to rent, and you as a landlord say, I'm happy to do that. What happens next? What happens next is the housing authority shows up and does an inspection of the unit. And if your unit is decent, safe, and sanitary, essentially, and the fair market rent is within our limits and meets all the other qualifications, we can make that happen very quickly. I would say in our case, most cases, probably a week.
Mhm. And
Should be a week, but it's likely to be longer. Keep in mind, our workforce is still being impacted by COVID. So we have that to deal with, but it shouldn't be more than a couple of weeks, and certainly not more than a month or two. But I'm afraid it's longer.
And if I could just speak for Washoe County, to speak to what John was saying, retaining landlords is a challenge, and that's something that we're really focusing on and trying to bring on more landlords. We did a landlord fair to educate them on our program, and then the emergency housing vouchers, HUD-VASH, so they understood. And then we also explained the process. So we can do it in a week if need be, and to bring on new landlords, we absolutely will. And very similar to Bill, it's, if you're a landlord and you want to work with us, then we're going to do everything we can to get you through this process. And it's really pretty painless. We do have to do that inspection, and we're looking at more safety. Do electrical, water, do they operate as they should? Do outlets work? Is there tripping hazards? Windows, doors open and close? So it's not a very strenuous inspection that we're doing. And again, we're trying to make sure landlords know that, and that we're a partner. And part of that is, they can be guaranteed that a portion of that rent is going to be paid every month. And we do annual inspections. So we're going to come out to that unit, and we can help support that landlord if there is, if the tenant's not maintaining the unit, because that's part of their Section 8 family obligations. So we can help support that landlord and making sure the tenant knows you need to be doing this. It's a violation of your lease. If you continue to do that, then your landlord could evict you. So we really try to sell it to the landlord that it's a partnership. They are helping the community. They are helping these individuals. So that's a struggle for us, and we're trying to bring on new landlords anytime we can, and get that message out that we need more landlords.
So let me jump in with a little promotional thing here. There's oftentimes we in the industry are not too keen on HUD. Often we think they're not as helpful as they could be. But if you're in Southern Nevada, on November 15th, there's going to be a landlord listening session. It's a session set up by HUD. We will be participating, and it's to get feedback from landlords in Southern Nevada area, in this region, about how we might make improvements, what services we can offer, how things are working for them. So if any of you are landlords or have contact with landlords, we'd like to get the word out that that's coming up, because that's a chance for landlords to give us some feedback. There's a question back.
Yes.
So-
Question is about.
Yeah. Yeah, the gist of it was what goes into the decision about how much project basing to do, what are the restrictions, what's involved in doing project basing. And I'll just jump in with a couple comments, and Amy and Bill can add. Essentially, housing authorities, now Amy's in a different situation. Remember, she's moving to work. She has a lot more flexibility than we do. But Bill and I, with our programs, we're allowed to project base no more than 20% of our units. So that's the restriction. We have about 12,000 units, so we could be doing 2,400 units. At this point, we have, I think, less than 300, maybe 150. It's largely a policy decision that goes to the governance of the agency. Some of the times the boards get very involved in it and will make those decisions. Sometimes it's made at the staff level. What the competition is is if you do project basing, then you're restricting where people can go to those properties. They have to go to those properties. The properties have the commitment of the subsidy to them. And you're not drawing people, you may be drawing people from your wait list, but it's only people applying to those properties. You can set up separate wait lists for those properties. So there's a competition between the wait list, which may not fit the needs of those properties. Those properties could be all 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom properties, and your wait list is largely larger families. So there's some competition and some tension between those two things. And I had another thought, but it escapes me at the moment. Maybe Bill wants to jump in. I don't know.
Well, John's exactly right. We're limited to 20%. So in our case, with 1,500 vouchers, that doesn't mean we can project base very many. And so we don't do that. We have about 100 that are project based right now. So about a third of what we're eligible to project base. We have out there the situation that we often see, and folks that are usually knocking on our door are folks who are developing tax credit properties. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with tax credit developments, but in order to obtain the tax credits, you typically have to serve folks at very low income levels, 30 and 40% AMI. And it's very difficult to operate a property with rents at 30 and 40% AMI. So the housing choice voucher, if it's project based in that property, enables you to charge a rent that you can live with and still serve those very low income households. So that's probably the sweet spot for project basing units. The challenge is, again, the very limited number of units. If we really went to town, and I know John, especially in this market, he could project base 1,200 vouchers tomorrow, and then he's out of business. He can't do any more. So that's the challenge we face with project basing.
We have
You want to jump in, Amy, and then I'll add my comment that I covered.
Yeah, with our project basing, we really focused on special need populations. So knowing the challenges that HUD-VASH faces, finding units for their veterans, we focused on project basing their vouchers, and they worked really well. And then we've also looked at homeless, focusing on project-based vouchers for homeless, because that is another population that has challenges finding units, and they have very low income. So we just built a 44 unit senior project, low income housing tax credit. And with that, we project based 12 vouchers specifically for seniors coming out of motels or the shelter. So that's been our focus as of more recently. We do have the ability we've set aside 25 for workforce housing. We haven't put those out to bid yet, but we've also want to start focusing on that population.
So let me just add a couple of comments. One, and I don't know whether you've done this, Amy, but I spent a long time in Oakland, and Oakland was also M2W. So one of the things we were looking at in Oakland under M2W was, instead of project basing the properties, base them with service providers. So the service providers would actually get the voucher rather than a property, and then they would work with the client to find the property that would house them, and they would provide the services, which is a variation of project basing. So I don't know if that's something you might try if you're not already doing it, Amy. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that to project base, there has to be a competition. And the competition generally, well, it can be just an open competition, pick the property. But as Bill says, the ones that make the most sense are the tax credit deals. That's where it adds the most value to the property. And it also assures that our units are going into a property that's really focused with a mission on serving low-income families. So typically, what a lot of housing authorities do, and I haven't been involved in it here, so I don't know how they've done it in the past, but typically what housing authorities do is they piggyback on the local jurisdiction that's issuing home funds, for example. So if the home funds are being competed, the housing authority's project-based vouchers will be committed to that property, and it's often a shared competition, or one-track competition rather than two that mismatch.
So we know that there's a lot of stigma around having a voucher. A lot of landlords don't want to rent to them. There's these negative opinions about people who use vouchers. When you're talking to the public and you're talking to potential landlords, how do you sell the idea of them becoming, allowing their property to be used for a housing choice voucher?
Well, let me just jump in a little growth I went through in terms of my view of using the press and public relations. Early when I started out, I met a housing authority director, told me his goal was to stay out of the press. Don't be in the press. Keep away from the press. He never wanted any press coverage. And I subscribed to that philosophy for many years. But because of that very question, I came to realize that no, housing authorities have a story to tell. There's a lot of really good work and a lot of people taking full advantage to do good things for their families. So my view is that the best thing to attack those stereotypes is to put out the story about the great successes of our families, the families that take advantage of our programs and end up sending their kids to Stanford or to University of Nevada or whatever they do. Tell the stories about the successes of your program, because there's far more successes of all of these programs than there are problems that are created. And as an example, we just celebrated last Thursday evening, we had, I think, somewhere around 70 or 80 participants graduated in our family self-sufficiency program, where they built up an escrow account and they succeeded in that program, and they are now taking the escrow and in some cases are making as a down payment for homes. These are people taking advantage of the programs and advancing or taking advantage of the programs to advance the opportunities for their families. And I think those are the stories we have to tell. It's kind of hard to go talk to somebody and overcome a stereotype without replacing it with the right kinds of stereotypes, or not stereotypes, but the right kinds of stories.
You want to jump in, Amy?
I agree with John. Definitely telling those stories makes such a huge difference, because there is that stigma, and we all know what amazing families and individuals that we work with day to day that remind us why we do this work. So we've done a lot more outreach, again, with the media, social media, to tell those stories, to make sure we get the information out there for, we've gone to the media and recruiting of landlords, telling them, this is really what we need. And it's really beneficial. And as far as, how we sell it to landlords, I mentioned earlier, it's a partnership, and, we are there to support them. And it's telling the stories to the landlords as well that, you're going to have bad tenants both on the program and off the program. And that's not every tenant, and how good these tenants are. And so just trying to work with them, explaining the benefits of the program, the individuals that they're helping. That's what we try to do. We do also offer landlord briefings every week. So if a landlord wants to come find out more information about our program, they can just show up to the briefing and we'll answer any of their questions. So those are just a few things we do, but I agree with John, telling our stories.
And John is so right. We're blessed to have the most awesome comms director anywhere. And that's one of the things we've really tried to do in recent years, is to tell that story. And we put that on our website, and particularly for elected officials, they thrive on hearing those stories, and that helps us as well. So always be looking for a good story to tell. Certainly we do in our jurisdiction. That's served us very well. And the other part of that is something Amy mentioned earlier is, for a landlord, we're saying we're going to mail you that check every month, man. That's going to be in your mailbox. They can't say that about a lot of their other units. Yes, it may not be the whole amount of rent, but to use my earlier example, if we're paying 500 of your 800 rent, hey, I'm pretty happy to get that in my mailbox every month. So that's another way we encourage that.
From a policy standpoint, what are some areas that, if we're talking to elected officials about the program, and so from a policy standpoint, what would you say you need, and not just with the voucher program, but in general as a public housing authority, what do you need?
Wow. Well, there's kind of a laundry list. And so we have to learn to cook that down to 2 or 3 or people stop listening. And so I'll just mention a couple, and we've already mentioned, we need funding for additional vouchers. And any advocacy that folks can do to help with that is really appreciated. And we're in an environment right now where we can make a difference. Probably, I've been in the housing business for about 35 years. And I can tell you, I've never seen an environment like we're in where housing is getting the attention that it is and the support that it is. And so if we're ever going to bring additional resources to housing, now's the time for us to act. So really would encourage that with all my heart. The other things that we could use, of course, are quicker turnaround on fair market rents. We talked about the lag in those rents. And in this kind of a housing market where we see rents advancing so rapidly and in such great amounts, we need to be able to keep up with that with our vouchers, and HUD's fair market rent system doesn't really help with that. And so any changes we could make to that would really be awesome. And then, of course, we always could use some more money. I don't know about John.
Well, I want to mention something that everybody in the room and everybody that's with us virtually can help us with, and that's we need advocacy. The Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority, it's fortunate because it has some wonderful assets that could be developed further. We have vacant land that we could build on. We have, as I mentioned, we have the ability to project base. We can project base in our own developments. We can partner with the developers and do deals on our land and put project-based units in it. We haven't talked about it, but we have something called Faircloth. That's getting off into the weeds a bit, but it's another form of subsidy. It's replacing public housing that disappeared from our area in years past, that we can go back and bring those units back using the rental assistance demonstration program. So between Faircloth units, and we have about 800 of those, in our project basing, you know, we could do a blend of subsidies into to provide operating subsidies into a tax credit deal. And we have the land, and we have some wonderful staff resources that have experience and know how to do this kind of thing. But we can't do that when we go into a city council meeting to try to do a new development and we get blown back by NIMBYism. It's really going to take advocacy from the community, advocacy from our industry, and support. And I really do believe from listening to the commissioners that we have right now, that they're serious about having the Housing Authority take on that role. So advocacy is going to be an important part of the future of at least this Housing Authority, meeting some more needs of the community.
And I agree.
Christmas, what do you need?
Well, I agree with both John and Bill. And I would say the resources and money for more development, you know, here in Washoe County, we don't have enough affordable housing. And so our board, the goal is to put more housing into the market, which costs a lot of money. And so that's what we're really focusing on, and finding where we're going to get all of that money to piece it together. You know, we are looking at those partnerships with developers, but I would say, along with Bill and John, I want more money for development so I can build more housing, new housing, more affordable housing.
So, tell us, as kind of a final closing, what does the future of public housing authorities, what does that look like, you know, next 10 years, 20 years, when you all are all basking in retirement?
I can start for Reno Housing Authority. You know, we've heard from HUD that actual public housing units, public housing sites are going away. HUD doesn't have the money to continue to maintain public housing. And so they're really pushing housing authorities to do RAD. And John mentioned it briefly earlier, which is the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. And John is now very well versed in RAD, and that's the direction we're going. And there's huge benefits to converting public housing over to the RAD program that, you know, those units, those older units can be rehabbed. You can build more units, if that's an opportunity. If you have a lot of land, you can build more units on that land. So that's a great opportunity for putting more units into the community. And so for the Reno Housing Authority, I really see it transforming. We'll get away from our public housing. We'll have more units. Our public housing sites will be in much better condition, and I want to add to those sites. And then development as we can, that we work with community developers on that. So really, I see us focusing on development, and that's where that's the direction we'll go. And just knowing, and I'll have probably John speak a little more about RAD, but when those conversions happens, and I say that we're going to move out of public housing, none of those individuals will lose their assistance. They will continue be assistance in some capacity. We're just using different buckets of money.
So, just building on that, what Amy didn't explain is that what RAD allows you to do is convert the ownership. So it's no longer public housing. It's privately owned, generally by nonprofit affiliates that we control, that we set up ourselves. But in doing that, it allows us to attract private investment. And that's where the tax credits come in, either 4% tax credits or 9% tax credits. And so we attract a lot of additional investment. So it's that private investment that allows us to make the physical improvements to the property. Let me say, to talk about where we're going to be in 5 or 10 years. I don't know where this housing authority is going to be in 5 or 10 years, but let me tell you the trend that I think is happening in the industry, and I think it's a great opportunity for this housing authority to jump on that bandwagon. And as the difference between housing authorities and nonprofit developers is disappearing. Housing authorities are becoming nonprofit developers. They're entering that whole arena. And they're becoming a lot more entrepreneurial. Some are even changing their names. Like the Portland Housing Authority is no longer I think it's Home Forward or something like that. They have a completely different name. Housing authorities are changing the way they operate, and they're changing their images across the country. And they're being led largely by MTW housing authorities, such as Amy's housing authority. Housing authorities are going out and doing things. And it's interesting because I think the 2 housing authorities here, Clark County and Las Vegas City Housing Authority, that go back 30, 40 years, were doing very entrepreneurial things that many other housing authorities around the country weren't doing at the time. That's the direction we're going, I think that's the direction of the industry, is becoming much more blended with the nonprofit world, forming various kinds of partnerships, partnering with nonprofits, partnering with for-profits, creating all kinds of complicated entities that own these properties, but take advantage of the tax law, quite frankly, because that's what the tax credit deal is all about. And I think that's the future. I think is becoming much more like private industry and applying lots more of the concepts that the nonprofit world have been applying, and building coalitions and being parts of organization like this organization, and being active members and forming partnerships. I think that's the future.
What he said.
Okay, well, do we have any more questions to close out in the audience?
I just have a quick question.
Yes.
You said that the individuals in the Housing Choice Voucher Program who have income pay 30% of their income towards the rent. If they don't have income, does the housing authority or does the voucher pay all of it?
The question was if a person doesn't have income to contribute toward the rent, does the housing authority pay all the rent?
In essence, yes. There are other questions that have to be asked, like how are you going to pay for food and those kind of things, but yes. In some cases, depending on how the program is set up, that could happen, but fundamentally the program doesn't prescribe that. And there are utility allowances that come with a voucher. We might wind up sending that person a check to pay for utilities.
taking place with the landlords?
It's a virtual thing, yeah. And if you contact the Las Vegas Housing Authority, I'm sorry, Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority next week when I'm back, because tomorrow's a holiday for us. For the rest of you, it's Friday, but for us, it's tomorrow. If you check with us, if you check with our office next week, I'll be able to give you the link. But I think if you go to HUD.gov, you might find it. It's November 15th, and it's landlord listening.
When you say advocacy, what is the most useful form of advocacy that we can have?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question about advocacy and how do we help. It's like you were prompted to do that. So the best thing you can do is to belong to a group like this, the Nevada Housing Coalition or the National Low Income Housing Coalition, a group like that, because they have their ear to the ground on these opportunities that have come up, and they will inform their membership. Our coalition just sent out a notice to all of our members about the pending legislation in Washington. They give you canned letters that you can sign on to that send directly to your representative or senator, and you can really make a difference because those contacts, it seems like, oh, they really don't care. They do. Those contacts all add up. So be sure you're a part of one of those kinds of organizations. Katie.
Real quick, hopefully my peeps online can hear this. When you join, make sure you follow us on Facebook. I just posted that landlord event to the Nevada Housing Coalition Facebook page, so you can grab it there.
See, another benefit of joining.
Let me just say there's two directions I think you need to direct advocacy. One's at the national level. We talk about HUD. HUD doesn't control our budgets. Congress controls our budgets. So at one level, our advocacy needs to be at the federal level. And so organizations such as this and some of the national organizations are places to participate. But locally, advocating for inclusionary zoning, advocacy for individual projects that need to be built. I mean, at the city council or at the county commission. Those are places that we need advocacy. Thanks for the question.
Yes. Amen, Brother Ben.
Nope, they answered that one very well.
Well, let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you for coming.